Okay, so we're going to start today's class. The topic of today is the environmental aspects, requirements, legal framework associated with water in the mining sector, okay, mineral processing. Today's class will be based on, I'm going to share it now, is going to be based on, not on this, sorry, wait. Give me a second. Is going to be based on an article that I think explains really well what happens with environmental and legal aspects associated with governing, and well, the title of the article is A Comparative Overview of Legal Frameworks Governing Water Use and Wastewater Discharge in the Mining Sector. Okay, so why did I choose this article? Even though it's not the most recent one, it gives us a really interesting overview on 8 countries with 12 jurisdictions, and explains the legal framework surrounding water use in the mining sector, water use and wastewater discharge in the mining sector. I didn't want to focus solely on Chilean aspects because I know many of you, most of you are from all around the world. And so I think it was better and more interesting to provide a more a comparative overview and a more broad overview of what goes on when it comes to governing water use on a more global scale. Okay. So today's class, I will do today's class on, and that's why I chose to do this class online, because I want to write it down. I want to do a written class about this, sort of explaining the main aspects and the different and more essential aspects of the paper, along with, a little bit of knowledge on what, sort of motivates this kind of what motivates these legal frameworks within mineral processing. Okay. So, and I'm recording this class, and of course, the document that is going to be generated from this class, I will also leave it in Aula, okay, for you to review later, along with the paper, of course. Okay, so are you seeing my screen, the Word document?
Yes.
See the Word document? If you please confirm. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Accommodate myself a little bit here. Okay, so start off. What we're going to be looking at today, here it is. So what we're going to be looking at today is water, wait. Environmental aspects and legal framework in mineral processing. Okay. So we're going to be looking at this topic on three main aspects. The first one has to do with water allocation. And by water allocation, I mean, we're going to be talking a little bit about, what the different constitutional structures surrounding water allocation. We're also going to be looking at, give me a second. Let me look at my cheat sheet over here. We're going to be looking at water rights and the different types of water rights that you can find around the world, the length of these water rights, and et cetera, et cetera. The second aspect that we're going to be looking at is water discharge and water quality, sorry. So here we're going to be looking at the type of permits that are usually required for this type of, to do water discharge and the water quality associated. Wait a second here. Community concerns. And tailing storage. And finally, sorry, let me have to move down here. And finally, and all that has to do with, or a little bit of what on law enforcement, or how the different countries or jurisdictions make sure that these laws are actually complied with. Okay. Now, before we move on, and a little bit, to sort of do a small introduction of this, I want to show you or share with you wait a second. I want to share with you. Here we are. Okay. So first of all, I want to share with you a little bit about, all the social and environmental and cultural aspects that surround mining. Okay, so when it comes to mining, mineral processing, mining companies in general, okay, these mining companies are located within in an environment and we're not talking only about ecological aspects, but also we're talking about communities that are going to be affected by the work of this of this big mining company. Now, compared to what used to happen, 30, 40, 50 years ago, now there's a very big concern of mining companies of engaging with the community and sort of incorporating the community into the actions and into the labor and into the the whole business of mining. Okay, and that all has to do with sustainability and maintaining a sustainable business. Now, a sustainable business does not only have to do with money, of course, but it also has to do with how the different stakeholders are involved into the business into the business, into the mining sector, and how this is going to affect the community, and how the community is going to affect the business. And of course, all this has to be done in sort of like a positive environment. Now, just to make sure we're on the same page on sustainability, okay, the UN defines sustainability, and you can find it here. Okay, there are several definitions, but one of the most important one is that the sustainability is defined as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Okay, there are several sustainable development goals, okay, defined by the UN. And nowadays, you can't, conceive any type of any type of process or industrial process in general without thinking about or aiming towards keeping, the sustainable development goals. So you have in total 17 sustainable development goals. So here's a small video about them. You can look at it later. I'm going to leave all these links for you so you can look at them. But in general, you know, companies, when thinking, have to work towards these sustainable development goals. Okay, so they have to think about the community, they have to think about the environment, and they also have to think about the culture of, you know, the area where they are immersed. Okay, so if you look at, for example, BHP bulletin, you're going to find a series of initiatives and things that are being done. I'm going to put this in English. A series of things that are being done with the community and with the environment in order to, you know, have a sustainable business. Okay. Now, as we know, all this sustainability isn't just something that comes out of the good hearts of, you know, the mining company or the business in general, but it is done because of, mainly because of, well, there are a few things that sort of condition you know, these sort of initiatives. One of them is a legal framework, which is what we're going to be talking a little bit about today. Very summarized, because of course laws and isn't really part of the scope of this course, but it is they are things that we have to take into account in order for this to work. Okay. And the other thing is, you know, the investors and stakeholders, or economical or financial stakeholders, also are now being very strict and making sure that companies do comply with environmental aspects, that they care for the community in order for them to invest. And why is that? Because they understand that a more sustainable business is going to, you know, have better protection towards the future. So I'm going to leave these links for you here so you can look a little bit on, you know, the sustainability aspect of the company, of this company. But if you check other web pages in general, you're going to find that there are many initiatives being done nowadays in order to sustain and engage with the community. Okay, so let's start with, please, if you have any questions, comments, whatever, please let me know, okay? So we're going to start with water allocation. Water allocation. So first of all, when understanding water allocation, first of all, we have to understand that every country has a different, you know, constitutional structure, okay? Constitutional structure. And that constitutional structure is pretty much going to define under which jurisdictions water allocation is actually is considered. Okay, so we have a centralized structure in which, for example, the country has,
Hello.
sorry, question?
No, I think we
Professor?
can see the word page.
I'm not sharing
Yeah.
screen. Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay.
Thank you for letting me know. I'm so sorry. Okay, now I'm sharing the screen. Okay, so I was letting you know, when it comes to water allocation, first of all, you have to take into account that countries have a jurisdictional structure, and that pretty much defines the jurisdictions under which water allocation has to be considered. So we have a centralized structure, or decentralized. So centralized structure is when we have, you know, sort of like one legislative system that moves the whole country. For example, Chile has, even though we have a lot of regions, each region operates the same throughout the whole country in terms of, you know, legal stuff. Okay, and a decentralized structure would be, for example, the United States. Okay, because the United States is divided in states, and each state constitutes a different jurisdiction. So what happens is that, for example, in Chile, we have the DGA, which is the Dirección General de Aguas, or in translated, the General Waterworks or Water Directorate. Okay, but the United States, depending on which state we're talking about, is going to have, different entities, supervising or enforcing the law regarding water issues. Okay, so that's something really interesting, important to take into account first. So whatever country you move to, okay, or finally end up working in, you have to consider that anything that has to do with law is going to be different, is going to be a bit different depending on the country. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next sheet. Second. No, I don't want to do that. I want to move on to the next sheet, and I don't know how to do this. Insertar. Página en blanco. Okay. I'm going to, order these, make this neat and nice for you to look at later. So another important point that you have to take into account when talking about water in general, especially, particularly in the mining sector, are the water rights, okay? So water rights are basically, just as the name says, the right you have to access a certain source of water, okay? So these water rights, depending on the country, can be land-based. And by land-based, I mean that if you own the land, the water is yours. If you own the land, the water is yours. Basically, okay, in very, very simple terms. And another interesting thing about water rights is that in some places, water rights are considered private. Okay, so the country doesn't own the waters, but it's private. And in some cases, this water is transferable or tradable. And in some cases, it's non-transferable. And what does this mean? Is that in some cases, if you have a land and you have water, this water you can sell it, you can transfer it, okay? But other countries, such as Peru, for example, water is not transferable. But for example, here in Chile, water is actually traded, and actually we're going to talk a little bit about that later. We even have sort of like a water market, okay? Well, it's not only in Chile, it happens in a lot of places, but basically water is something that can be traded, okay? I'm not going to give you any opinions on what I have about tradable water, but it's what goes on, okay? That's pretty much what I wanted to transmit. Okay. Other aspects to consider about water right is that in some cases, okay, there's a concept called used-based prior appropriation. Okay, so basically this says is that if, first come, first serve, okay? First, sort of a different way of saying first come, first serve. But after that, with the difference that after that first serve, you don't have to, give the water away. Okay, so basically, if you found the source of water and you're using it, you're not required to, give it to anyone else. It's yours. Okay. in other cases, okay, water rights are granted while you have a reasonable use for them, okay? And something else that has to be taken into account is the length of these water rights. In some countries, these are granted temporarily, and you have to, reapply after a few years. You have to reapply after some years, because in general, whatever these water rights are granted for quite a while. But on the other hand, in some cases, water rights are granted in perpetuity. So if you are lucky enough, to have a land with water, the water is yours, and you can have it, and then you have it forever and do basically what you want with it. And by do what you want with it, yes, I mean that you can actually sell the water to someone who wants to buy it, basically. Okay. Now, when it comes to water permits, because when you have water allocation, you have to, worry about having the permission to extract the water. It's not something that you can actually basically do immediately. Okay. In some countries, you have to do the environmental impact assessment, and get the permit at the same time. I see, in order for you to use the water, you must comply with these two. But in other countries, such as Chile, you can ask for the permit first and the environmental impact assessment later. So it's much easier, for example, to get the water permit, and you can use the water, and you can do, the environmental impact assessment later, okay? But as I said, it depends on the country. Before we move on, I'm talking about it depends on the country, but in this article that we are, sort of debriefing, okay, so it's quite a short article. It has, as you can see, I don't know how many pages it has. Wait. It has less than 10 pages, as you can see. And what I want to show you is the following. That if you go to the end of the article in an annex, you will find a summary of all of these aspects and how each country that formed part of the study makes, use of, or does, complies with each one of these aspects. Okay, so when you read the article, you will, see how differently each country applies, or enforces the law. Okay, let's go back here. Please, if you have any questions, comments that you'd like to add to enrich the class, please, let me know. Now, another interesting aspect when it comes to water allocation is that the type of water in some cases is considered. The type of water. And by type of water, I mean continental sources, because desalinized water falls under different categories. So the type of water can either be groundwater or it can be surface water. Now, in some cases, okay, the water permit only accounts for the total. So it doesn't really matter if you're extracting groundwater or surface water. What really matters is the total. And in other cases, you have to make a distinction between if you're either extracting groundwater or surface water. Okay, so you have to, ask for separate permits. Okay. Now, in some cases, you have no choice but to choose one source or the other. For example, northern Chile, the waters or the sources that you have to get the permits from are all groundwater sources, okay? The surface water sources are generally go untouched because of environmental issues and because there isn't much of it anyway, okay? So that's something interesting to take into account as well. Other things that you have to take into account when asking for, when talking about water allocation is the volume of water. So in this case, you have to consider that the the source has a limit of extraction. And even though, and especially this is the case of the mining companies, and even though a mining company may own, certain water rights, that doesn't give them the total right to extract the maximum limit of water, okay? There are restrictions of it to the volume that is extracted. So even if you own a mining company, for example, even though you may have a source that is yours because it's land-based, because of whatever, the mining company is going to have restrictions to how much it can extract. And this depends on, for example, in the case of Chile, the DGA, the General Water Directorate, and in other countries it's going to be limited by other factors, okay? But in general, and these limits are usually done, considering environmental issues and considering to have enough water for the community. Okay. Other things that you have to take into account when talking about the volume of water is water source options. And these water source options can either be the continental or the non-conventional, such as desalinated water. Okay. Some also are subjected to how a company management of reused volumes of reuse water. Okay. And sometimes the volume of water is also depends on how the extraction produces impacts on the environment or on the community. And a really critical aspect in many countries, for example, such as Peru, okay, are the indigenous communities. Indigenous communities. Okay, so they play in many countries, indigenous communities hold or are able to state or make a lot of pressure on how the water is used, okay? And the ideal thing, and that's when we're talking about, sustainability, is that when a company is operating, it must take into account, how it's going to impact or how, the company is eventually going to interact with the community and the environment, of course. So when it comes to communities, okay, community, okay, involvement, the ideal is for a community to be fully involved in what the company, when it comes to, especially to what the company is doing, especially when it comes to something so vital as water. So in that case, you know, several things have to happen. The community, it's very important for the community to be informed. But this information is actually really strange because in some cases, the information is done directly by community engagement. So several meetings are sustained with the community to explain that water has to be extracted for these reasons, that the, you know, water that is extracted is going to, even though water is going to be extracted, water is going to be available for the community in the long term. But in some cases, you know, the use of a water source is sometimes done through press. Okay. And by press, I mean either the radio, which is sometimes done, or sometimes the newspaper. Okay. And this is actually something really, really tricky because not everyone is listening to the radio all the time, and not everyone is looking at the newspaper all the time. For example, in Chile, there's a newspaper that reports, legal stuff. Okay, so for example, if a person is going to for example, or in this case, in the case of water rights, okay, sometimes this newspaper in a day states, okay, so this water source is going to be used by this person in this amount, etc., and it's actually reported in the newspaper. Okay. But in some cases, of course, this is really tricky because sometimes, you know, not everyone is looking at the newspaper. So it's really tricky because sometimes water rights are granted and, you know, the community says, but you didn't tell us. Yes, I did tell you. I told you through the newspaper. So it's, you know, it's a little bit sketchy if you think about it, but it's legal. Okay. Remember that things in life, sometimes they're legal. Okay. But sometimes the fact that they're legal, you know, there is something, you know, there's a small line, you know, between what's legal and what's, you know, ethically correct. Okay.
Hello. Can I ask a question about this
Yes.
topic? Let's say you are working in a like big company in the country and everyone knows you. As you
Okay.
said, community information. Of course, like there are people who doesn't know the mining in the other side, like not in the near community, but the local people, not in general. And as a person who is responsible for this, would you try to convince all the country that your company is doing a great thing with water management or these kind of environmental stuff, or how long you can expand your range to informing the community?
It depends. It depends really much on the country, but when it's usually a big company, and since they have, you know, sort of like an image to care for, and you know, financial stakeholders have their eyes on them and stuff like that, they do take a while to do the community engagement and the community and inform the community. So big companies usually don't go to this kind of sketchy stuff, but they do make an effort through their environmental departments and their communications departments to you know, engage through the community. And that engagement can be through various ways. It can be done through meetings, you know, to inform what's happening. It can be done by employing people from the community into the company to the company. You know, initiatives, you know, like building parks and stuff, you know, for the children to play. There are several things that they actually do, but I don't know if there's a, you know, a certain due date or, you know, limit of time to where they have to, you know, communicate all this stuff. But generally what these companies do is they're continuously, you know, talking and engaging with the community
Thank you.
in order to avoid these problems.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I think it was the kind of.
Okay, thank you. It's a good question. Um, okay. So when it comes to another sheet now, another hoja. Okay, so when it comes to, although we talked a little bit about this earlier, there is something important to consider about restrictions on length and scope. On length and on the length of the water rights, okay, or the water allocation. So in some cases, you can use the water for as long as it's useful. Okay, so that has to do a little bit with the reasonable use of water. And in other cases, you have sort of like a period of time or duration. And as I said before, that period can be, for some years, in the order of years, or it can be granted forever, okay, or in perpetuity, okay. Now, as I said, even though you can have a water right granted in perpetuity for a long time, you can't really, it is still subjected to restrictions by the authority, okay? Okay? And now, a really, really tricky thing now is, the water market. Now, in my opinion, talking about water market, well, first of all, it's not something that I'm specialized in, okay? But the water market is basically a place where you can trade water, okay? It sounds really, Frank, I'll get to you right in a, I'll finish this idea and I'll get to you. The thing
Right.
about the water market is that, sometimes you think about how something so essential to life can actually be transferred, traded. Okay, so in that sense, you can have, everyone can have their own opinion on that. But basically what we're talking about here is that water is tradable depending on the jurisdiction. And even sometimes you have a price on water, okay, a regulated price. Or sometimes in this water market, water goes to the best bidder, okay? And that is something really tricky because in general, when it comes to bidding water, big companies are the ones that are favored in this sense. Thank you, Frank.
All right, Professor. So there is this issue about the groundwater, in most mining companies in other allied firms. So this water is being drilled by the firms themselves, from the ground. But it looks
Yeah.
like the government charges them because in my country, for example, there is a yearly tariff that every company has to pay for the use of groundwater, being drilled by its own boreholes and all that. And even in the mining companies where the old mines, there's water left, they still pay for the use of such water. I want to understand why that should be the situation, because the mining firm or those industry that are taking care of the treatment and the cost and the drilling of the water.
Okay. I think answers the question. Because on one hand, you have all the operational costs that are behind, groundwater extraction. And on the other hand, is that the companies have to pay for the water, have to pay the state to use this water.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
It depends on the country, of course. It depends on the country. It depends on the jurisdiction. Frank, where are you from?
I'm
If you
from
can
Ghana.
remind me. From Ghana?
From Ghana, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, if you think about it, and in this case, everyone can have their own opinion, of course. In my opinion, that is what's most fair. I mean, if you're profiting from water, if you're, yeah, basically, if you're profiting, and you use this water, you know, for your own profit, in some way you have to retribute to the state, you know, for extracting this natural resource.
Mhm.
However, there are many countries that does not happen. For example, in the case of Chile, in our water code states that water is free. Free. I mean, it means that, all the Chileans are owners of the water. Okay. That sounds very nice on paper, of course. But when it comes to extraction or groundwater extraction or surface water extraction, what is done is that if a mining company, has, because they're lucky, finds a water source in their land, that water source belongs to them. They don't have to pay the country, to have this water because it's theirs, because the water code, the constitution states that water is everyone's. Okay, it's all the Chileans own the water. All the Chileans own the water, but some of them own the water more than others, basically. Okay. But the company, of course, has to assume the cost, the operational cost to extract the groundwater. Now, as I said, that pretty much depends on, and that's why we're talking a little, this is very cultural also, because this is my opinion, of course. You can all think whatever you want and read a little bit more about it and whatever. But for example, our water code or current water code and constitution was done during the, Pinochet's dictatorship. So there are a lot of things that were done, constructed, built, schemed, thinking about, the big companies. Okay. Some say that's fair because, mining companies are the ones that, produce, or big companies are the ones that are going to give you jobs and stuff like that. My opinion is a little bit different, but anyhow, as I said, each one of you can have your own opinion on this because water is actually a very, very political issue. But of course, in my opinion, if you're using something to profit, you should make some sort of return, back to the country for using something as valuable as water. But as I said, it depends. There are cultural reasons, historical reasons that why these things are different in one place versus the other. I don't know if you want to add something to that.
That's okay, Prof. Thank you.
Okay. As I said, we can't see the word. What word? Okay. And lastly, in some countries, okay, there are no, wait, sorry. Some countries encourage efficient water use. So in that case, how is water use encouraged? In some cases, water intake is limited. So when water intake is limited, or fresh water intake is limited, countries or the company has no other choice but to have a more efficient process, which is what is happening, for example, in many companies in Chile. Companies in Chile are increasing their water efficiency basically because they don't have any water left. They don't really have much access to water. But in other cases, there are economic incentives for using less water. And this is the case, for example, of China. Okay, so when you read the article, you'll see and find a little bit more information on that. Okay. Okay, let's move on to the second point, which is water discharge and water quality. So when we're talking about this, basically, we're talking a little bit about waste. Can you wait for me a little bit? Because sometimes someone's at the door. Please give me a moment. Okay, I'm back. So this is basically talking a little bit about the waste that the company generates, okay? Well, waste that is associated to water. Okay, so first of all, each country has their own set of laws, supreme decrees, and whatever, when it comes to water discharge. And in some cases, it depends on the jurisdiction. Sometimes the whole country is a unique jurisdiction. So you can look a little bit about that in the article that I'm going to leave available for you. But whatever discharge permits have to be issued, okay? And in some cases, when it comes to discharge permits, in some cases, you just need one permit, sorry. One permit. You have one permit and independent of what you're actually discharging. And in other countries, I think such as Australia, you have to issue permits depending on what you're discharging, depending on the elements, contaminants that are discharged. Okay. So this is the case of Australia, for example. Okay. I think it was Australia. Yes, it was Australia. When it comes to water discharge, also, of course, the community, you have to take into account the community concerns. And of course, the environmental impact. Now, when it comes to environmental impact, in general, a company, when it's going to start its operation and before obtaining the permit to actually start, building or, extracting, they have to go through environmental impact assessments. And these environmental impact assessments consider a lot of things, among them a baseline study, which means that this is what this site looks like without the project. In order for the authority to be able to compare what happens after the implementation of a project. So these baseline studies consider ecological factors, hydrological factors, etc., etc. Okay, so in that sense, when for example, if a company is discharging water, okay, the baseline allows the company the authority to say, oh, because of your operation, you're contaminating, or according to the baseline study, your discharges aren't producing any negative effects on the environment. Okay. And another critical issue when it comes to water discharge and storage is tailings storage. It's a very critical issue. Now, when it comes to tailing storage, and a little bit later on, we're going to talk about post-closure as well. Okay, when it comes to tailings and storage, it really, it really much depends on the country of what is actually asked for the company to do before, the dam is actually built. So in some cases, there must be a detailed plan of the tailings operation, management, etc., etc. So sometimes the authority asks for, a detailed plan before the dam is actually built. Sometimes an estimation of, the contamination is also required. And in some cases, just the dam design is required. So it pretty much depends on, the country or the legislation or the jurisdiction, what kind of things are required or asked for on the side of the authority for the tailing storage dam to be able to operate. And another interesting topic when it comes to water discharge are post-closure obligations. Post-closure obligations. And by post-closure, I mean, once, the mine site reaches its, usefulness, the mine site has to be adequately closed in order for it not to produce any environmental impacts or environmental liabilities in the future. So in that case, depending on the jurisdiction, sometimes a detailed plan of closure is asked for. In other cases, companies have to, elaborate a cost or the budget that closure is going to require, not only closure itself, but, the post-closure, because there is going to be a budget associated to monitoring, to remediation actions, etc. But, the main issue when it comes to post-closure is, how long do we care for the mine that is post-closure, okay? So sometimes, depending on the place, there are laws that say you have to monitor this place for 10 years, assuming that after 10 years, no more contamination is going to occur because of this mine closure. 10 years, so in some cases, it's 5 years, okay? But it's not easy to find, a place, a country that's going to say, you have to monitor this site perpetually. That does not happen, okay? And as a matter of fact, the problem with establishing these limits is that, okay, you monitor the place, you remediate when it's adequate, whatever. But after this time has passed, the mine gets closed and there are no more legal obligations, tying the company down to the site. So, liabilities can continue to go on, despite all, the post-closure measures that were taken. Okay, and when it comes to, and the last point that we're going to talk about today is enforcement, which is basically law enforcement. Okay, so how do I get the company to actually do or comply with all these legal obligations? Okay. So it really much depends on the country, on the legislation, and how these companies have to, sort of do the law enforcement. So on one side, you have, the legal aspects, which is the law, of course, law, the directorates that have to, watch over or enforce the law here. Another case is, the communities very much play an important role in this because, sometimes communities, raise their voice when they see that, water isn't actually being taken care of, or if the company is not complying with its commitments and so on and so forth. Another thing about law enforcement is that sometimes because of lack of resources, there are sometimes not enough people or there are not enough people to go around, checking if, the companies are doing the right thing, basically. So sometimes law goes unenforced because, you know, there isn't anyone, you know, to actually make sure that, you know, the company's doing everything right. Okay. Okay. So that would be, let me see if there's something else to add. Just give me a second. Let me see if there's anything interesting to add. No, that's pretty much it. Okay, and of course, if a company doesn't comply, there has to be some sort of degree of criminal remedy in case you know, the law isn't being complied with. For example, this is a really interesting example, and you're going to read about it later. In China, if 3 or more serious violations occur, the mining site can actually be closed down by the state. Okay. That usually doesn't happen. That's pretty much, you know, something really extreme. But pretty much China must be the only place in the world where that happens. Okay. Okay. Let me save this so I don't lose it. Yes. Okay. And that would be all for today. You guys have any questions? Comments? Leonardo.
Yeah. Hello, Professor. I have one question, but not specific about the class. It's because we have the assignment 3 to deliver, but there is no place in aula. So do we send it by email to you?
Let me I asked the assistants to make a box, but I don't think that they received my email yet. I'll do it myself.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I think
then
I had a group that already delivered the assignment by email. Can you please upload it to the box when I'll send you an email when the box is created, okay?
Okay. Thank you. I have another question. It's because the other question is because next week we are supposed to have a test.
Yeah.
And what will be the content of this test? Because
The content of this test is from topic 6 and topic 6, 7, 8, and this one that's 9, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
As I've done before, I'll let you know what the format of the test is going to be in the following days, so you don't get any surprises.
Okay. Is it going to be similar to the first one, or?
Yes, it's going to be similar to the first one, but I think it's going to be a little bit shorter or maybe longer, in the sense that I think we're just going to do the test in one run, not in the 2 time slots.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Hello.
Yes, Gideon.
Yes. So sorry. Like the first one that you sent us sample questions. Will you do a similar thing for the second test as well?
Oh, you want last year's tests as an
Yeah.
example? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll send it to you. Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Okay. Thank
I'll
you.
send it to you all, not just to you, Gideon, to everyone. Have to be fair. Have to give the information to everyone.
Okay. All right.
Okay, guys. Okay, so that will be all for today. I'm going to be uploading the information of the class and everything that you asked for during the day, okay? I'll let you know when it's uploaded.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Take care. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Professor.